week is Joy Burnford, the founder and CEO of Encompass Equality, a gender equality expert and author of the best-selling book, Don't Fix Women, The Practical Path to Gender Equality at Work. And if you're watching this on YouTube, here's a quick pic. With over 25 years' experience as a business leader, non-exec director, podcast host and speaker, Joy and her team provide clients with practical solutions to advancing gender equality in their organisations, so they can better attract, retain women and help them progress in their careers. As host of the Equality Conversation podcast and contributor of over 70 articles on Forbes.com, Joy has interviewed hundreds of senior business leaders, board members, CEOs, authors, and experts, and has been cited in national business and HR press. She speaks regularly at conferences and industry events and is working with the British Standards Institution to create a new standard for menopause and menstruation in the workplace. Welcome to the business of being brilliant, Joy.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. And I know we're both very busy working mums,
Yes.
regularly swapping notes on how we find enough time in the day to do everything that we would like to do at home and at work. And I'm going to ask a fun question to start with, which is, if I gave you an extra day this week just for you, if you got to have 8 days this week, how would you ideally spend it?
Well, that's such a lovely question. And actually this week, I'm only working 4 days because I'm going to a spa on Friday. So actually I've got my sort of extra day this week. So I think that's
Great.
probably what I would, I love to, as you know, I talk a lot about sort of self-care and well-being and looking after yourself, because it's really important to put your own oxygen mask on first when we're busy and doing things. So I really do value my time that I can spend either swimming or going and having a massage if I'm lucky enough to do that. So I've booked in this day at the spa with some friends because I just really need that escape actually from the home, because I work at home and life is at home and everything's at home. So I find it quite a stressful place to be. So actually having that escape is really something I really, really value. So if I had an extra day, I'd spend another day at the spa.
Like an overnight stay.
Yes.
Well, if you don't get back on Saturday, your family know where you are.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And I totally get what you mean about, actually, for many of us, men and women, you know, home actually represents a place of work, either paid work or unpaid work. And I often feel the same, that actually I only really switch off when I'm not at home, which sometimes feels a bit sad to say that, but actually it's just reality. I am surrounded by work of some nature when I'm in my home environment.
Yeah, I totally feel that. And I think my husband often thinks I'm a bit strange because I say I want to go and stay in a hotel, even if it's like, you know, just a Premier Inn away, like half an hour away from home. I'm like, that's just bliss for me, because you get away from all the clutter and you can actually really, you know, focus on just being, because often there's so many other things, you know, to do. And I think you can be better for your kids as well when you're in that state as well, because often there's washing, there's cooking, there's everything else that we need to do. So to be there and present for your kids as well, I think is really important.
Yes, definitely. Switching off regularly, getting your space and headspace is fantastic. Well, enjoy your spa day on Friday.
Thank you.
Very envious. And talking now about your career and what you do, how did you get to become an expert in gender equality? Is it something you set out to do from the outset? You know, tell me a little bit about how your career has evolved.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I didn't, you know, it's something I've ended up falling into, I guess. I mean, I suppose there's been a passion there for my career. I mean, I started off working in a management consulting industry, worked for PA Consulting Group, and my sort of my background's been in marketing, and then I set up a business back in 2007 called Source Global Research, and this is sort of being consultants to management consulting firms, and part of what after I did that, part of what my sort of journey took me on to was setting up this current business, it was called My Confidence Matters, now called Encompass Equality. But if I tell you a little bit about sort of why my Confidence Matters came about, was because I had my second child, and I sort of had a year of thinking about what am I going to do for my next 10 years in my career. And part of that kind of year that I took out, I had some coaching and started looking sort of internally at myself and what I really wanted. And I looked back at my career and realized that I'd always sort of sat in the background really in business. So in sort of when I was a child, I did lots of acting and lots of singing, and never saw any difference between men and women. And I just kind of, I grew up with a mum who was very, helped me to do whatever I wanted to do. As soon as I hit the workplace, I kind of lost my confidence, and I thought, well, why would anybody listen to me? And I kind of just lived with that, and it wasn't a particular problem actually, until I then sort of looked back and thought, well, this is interesting, and talking to other people about confidence, and a lot of women said, oh, I totally get you. I really lack confidence, and I feel worried about speaking up when there's a room full of men. And I remember I worked for the trade body for consulting firms, and what I had to do was sort of present at meetings with 50 council members who were all head of consulting firms, pretty much all men. And I remember feeling a bit like a punch bag sometimes. And I was just like, oh, this is really hard. And I just didn't feel I had the weight. And I just felt people said to me things like, you have to sleep your way to the top. And I'm like, things like that. And I was like, this is just not right. So part of it was kind of a bit like a drip, drip, drip thing. I didn't really think I was going to end up in this. But when I had that year of reflection, I was thinking about new business ideas, and everything had a bit of a flavor of women in business, because I guess that was me. And the more people I spoke to, I thought there are so many people like me, and actually I could see there was some role there that I could bring. One of the ideas I had was doing a company called Truffle, which was like the mushroom, not the chocolate, and bringing sort of part-time women who could bring a little bit of great sort of essence to the workplace on a part-time basis, and work part-time, but give a lot of value. But I decided that wasn't me for my sort of career. That wasn't the gender. There were other people doing that as well. So I found my niche in doing what I'm doing now, and I became a curator of confidence. And in the early days, helped women with confidence. And I know now that it's not just women that lack confidence. It's everybody can lack confidence, but often I find men lack the confidence to say they lack confidence, and women often speak up a bit more about that. And I could see there was a role there to help women speak up. And then, as you said at the beginning, I've written for Forbes and spoken to some amazing senior women, men, CEOs. And the more I spoke to them, the more I realized it wasn't about confidence, because you can be really confident, but if the workplaces are not set up to support women, and I keep seeing so many women leaving the workplace in sort of midlife, ages sort of 40s, 50s, when you get this kind of perfect storm of challenges, and women were leaving. And I thought, this is really, I hate when I see problems and things like that. I just want to sort of help fix it. So I've morphed into this role in terms of helping organizations think through what you can do to better support the women that work for you. So in answer to your question, it wasn't a sort of big dream of mine, but it seems to have become, there have been little elements of it sort of through my career, and then sort of culminating in what I do now. And I think it's so wonderful to be able to do something where you feel passionate about a subject and make that your living,
Yeah.
which is super.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting to hear about that kind of gradual realization, both about, your own career reflections, but actually
Mm,
the world of work that you're operating in, and what you've
mm,
been noticing about that over the years, and also
mm.
that evolution, and think in seeing this as initially the problem is about women not having enough confidence, to actually the problem is the environment and
Yeah,
the norms that we have and the
yeah,
structures that are in place that
yeah,
actually aren't well designed to help
yeah,
women
yeah.
succeed in their careers. So
And it's
let's set
definitely
this.
both. I
Yeah,
think it's both, definitely. Both the confidence is still really, really important. And I think
yeah,
I've probably told you before, before 8 years ago, you probably wouldn't see anything about me on the internet, because I have worked so hard to build a personal brand, to build that confidence in speaking up. And I'd never have done a podcast, 8 years ago. Never. I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't speak at a party. Never mind speaking in front of an audience, which is now what I do. And I love to share that story, because you can learn confidence. It's a skill you can learn, which I didn't realize. So you need that, absolutely. But then it's, as you say, it's the sort of the structural things that need to change
yeah.
in tandem.
And your words around kind of sitting in the background, I
Mm,
think will resonate for a lot of people, men and women listening to that, thinking, actually, do I feel in the background in my
yeah,
team, in my organization?
yeah,
Am I speaking up as much as I'd like to and feel able to? Am I contributing the value that I know is within, and the potential that's within
yes,
me?
yes.
So, let's set the scene a little bit around gender equality, and I guess specifically in the UK,
Mm,
predominantly UK listeners, but actually international listeners for the podcast as well. But I know it's a fairly similar picture in other something Western nations, perhaps the Nordics aside. But despite a recent flurry of female prime ministers in Germany and the UK, if we go back several prime ministers in the UK to about
Yeah.
2 years ago, um, New Zealand, etc.
Yeah.
Actually, we've seen a bit of a return to, they've stepped down for various reasons. So we've got less
Mm,
women, very visible women in senior power. We've had lots of progress with women getting onto boards, recent news
mhm,
about that reaching
mhm,
40% or so,
mhm, mhm.
but less in executive roles. Can
Yeah.
you can you expand that picture a little bit? What's the
Mm,
current state of play, and is it changing
absolutely.
very fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think the World Economic Forum, the latest research from them showed it's 150 years away till we reach gender parity and economic participation. And I think the year before it was 268. So I think we've moved some way. I think there is some good news. I think we've still got a lot, a long way to go. And I think it'd be great. I'm sure you'll agree. We'd like to get it to either our lifetime or our children's lifetime before we see that parity. And as you say, the FTSE Women Leaders Review said, 40% on boards, which that target's been reached 3 years ahead of where they wanted to get to that, which is fantastic. But it is more non-exec roles. There's still only 8% of the FTSE 100 CEOs are women. I think there's also the getting to those very senior roles is very, very difficult, and there are not that many of the roles to fill. So that's also another big problem. But I think where we need to work is this kind of pipeline of women coming through and retaining women, because I think what happens is you get a lot of sectors, you have 50-50 women joining at the bottom rungs of the workplace. And then in my book I talk about sort of career mountain, and you get to the sort of 40s, 50s, maybe after children, potentially when you hit things like menopause, you might then end up having to care for an elderly relative. You have all this, what I call this perfect storm of challenges, which, when you join in a career in your 20s, you if you're lucky, you don't have any responsibilities. You can just live life, you can work hard, you can have a great time. And then organizations were designed by men for men. And I think what happens is that there are things like even just toilet facilities. I'm getting really basic. There are things like that are just not. They're far too far away from where the offices are, or the uniform that's being provided is designed around a male body. And I was talking to John Pettigrew, who's the National Grid CEO, and he was talking about they were doing a massive bit of work about changing the uniforms for women so they could climb up poles, because they would say, well, we haven't got any women doing this job. And we're like, well, if you get the uniform right, then you can, that will be first step in the process.
Yeah.
And another organization that I've been talking to have offices all over the world, and Egypt, I think it was, they were saying, talking about gender equality, and at different places around the world, that people are in different stages here. I think some places are more advanced than others. But in Egypt, they were talking about having to create a toilet block for women. So I won't talk about toilets very much longer, but I just think it's really basic. Some of these
Yes.
things, and providing systems that will work, and things like, when women come back after maternity. I remember being in London. My husband, actually, I've got a great ally at home. My husband took a year off when we had our first child, and he brought our daughter up to London, and I was working, and I'd end up doing things like expressing milk in the local train station in the toilets. And it's like, sorry, I'm talking about toilets again. But there's some, that's, it's not great. If you can provide a room or somewhere that people can actually, breastfeed, potentially have people come in, and nannies or other people who are looking after kids, potentially if women want to work, to provide those spaces that actually can help you do your day job. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who was a partner in a law firm, and she was promoted to partner on maternity leave, and she was saying she has a great support structure at home. So her husband does, is not a lawyer, so he can help in the home. She's got really supportive workplace. Owen Mitchell is the organisation. They have 50-50. I think they've got more women partners now than men, and they're such a female friendly organisation, and it means that they can actually operate flexibly, in terms of your area of work, in terms of flexible working, and allowing people to flex how and where they work, and that sort of thing. Is so important for women. It means she can go and go and do reading with her child at school at 11 till 12, but actually she'll be on early in the morning, or she'll be working late at night, and that flexibility to sort of flex your work around
Mm.
your life is so important.
Yeah. And although we might be trying to solve the problem of female retention and progression,
Mm.
it's not a women's issue, it's a business issue, right? And actually, by redesigning our world of work and the benefits and the policies and things,
Mm.
actually men will benefit too. So, right, so they can
Yeah,
be more
absolutely.
active parents, they can enjoy the same work flexibility that they haven't had
Yeah,
access to in the
yeah,
past.
yeah.
Yeah. So
And,
I know you're,
allyship.
yeah.
I was just saying, allyship I talked a lot last week with International Women's Day about allyship, both in work and at home, and how it's about not calling men out, it's about calling men in and really engaging men in the conversation. If we want to make change happen within gender equality, women can't do it. Nobody ever has affected change in a minority. It just doesn't work. So you need to get men. And actually, my book is written for business leaders. It's about how you change the workplaces. It's not about women leaning in more. I mean, I know that was a topic that came up, a few years ago about being more
Mm.
confident and more, present. But I think we need to also look at the role of men and masculinity and what it means to be a man. There's some Elliot Ray is somebody worth looking up, and Daniela Fiandaca is Token Man Consulting. They're doing some great work in this space and really engaging men in the conversation and what it means to be a father, what it means to be a man in today's world.
Yeah. And you mentioned allyship there, and I know that's something
Mm,
you expand on in the book. Can you say a little bit more about what you describe in the book about the three cultural frameworks
mm,
around flexibility and allyship and
yeah,
coaching and support? Because you're arguing that
absolutely.
these are the things that all organizations can put in place, right? That will really help both
Yeah.
women to succeed as well as men.
Yeah, that was the most surprising thing I think I found from writing my book, because I thought I was writing a book about helping women. And then having done all the research and put the book together, I was like, actually, this isn't going to just help women, this will help everybody. Because, flexible working. So the three cultural frameworks that I recommend, flexibility, as you say, allyship, in the workplace, and then coaching and support. And it's like creating a coaching culture in an organization. It's having those coaching conversations, so listening, asking the right questions. And every single person in an organization can do that. It's not about having a one-to-one coach, even though that would be lovely. It's just having those open conversations. And then by having all those things, it means when you hit a kind of an obstacle on that path, whether that's menopause, whether it's caring responsibilities, if you have that flexibility, taking sort of caring as an example, you have flexibility, so you can flex your work around, what time you potentially go into work, or the time you come home from work, or needing to take some time off to go and watch a school play or something. Um, so flexibility is absolutely key. Allyship, when it comes to maternity, really understanding and being curious about what it is like for a woman to go off on maternity leave. And I often hear, and in my book, there's a whole page of these things, what ifs. When women come back after maternity, they're like, oh, what if I, I can't get away when my child's ill? Or what if I can't get promoted because I've got a baby? And being curious and being a great manager is, helping women. And perhaps a tip that I heard from Jessica Chivers actually was to record a video before you go on maternity leave about all your great successes, and then when you come back to watch it again. And it's little things like that. Line managers could say, "How about doing that?" Because that would really help you with your confidence, and
Mm.
just being really open and empathetic as a leader to sort of understanding those challenges, and understanding if you haven't got kids, asking the question, being vulnerable and asking, saying, I don't know what it's like to have kids because I don't have kids, but what's it like being a woman working here? And actually just that allyship and being really open to having those conversations, acting with insight. Um, and Yeah, so flexibility, we've talked about coaching and support and allyship. And I
Yeah.
think doing all of those things. And allyship is, again, it's like, it's not about necessarily men being allies to women. It's about women being allies to men in the home, and actually strategically talking about what role do you want to play in the home. I know James Clary, who I interviewed from Coots, he was saying he was trying really hard to go to the school and pick up kids and stuff, and he felt really excluded because there were all the women standing over there at school gates, and he was sort of on his own, and he felt excluded. And he said, I'm really trying, but I'm just not feeling very welcomed here. So it's actually about, looking at allyship from the other perspective. If you want men to be more hands-on, don't treat them as a sort of, add-on. It's actually be part of that conversation, and work out what you can do differently
Yeah,
as a family.
that's so true. And we all bring, natural biases, don't we? Whether, you know, as
Mm.
a woman dropping a child off at school, we see a man dropping a child off and you think, well, they won't be interested in some social chat, or oh, it must be the morning that the mum can't drop them off or whatever. You lead to some assumptions. And
Yeah.
a brilliant book that I read that really opened my eyes was Marianne Sieghardt's The Authority Gap. And I know
Mm,
it's included in your
mm, mm.
bibliography. And she says, actually, both men and women are naturally biased to view women as less authoritative than men. So this isn't about assuming a male manager won't understand your maternity,
Yeah.
post-maternity return needs and
Yeah.
preferences. Actually, it could just as well be a female line manager who hasn't
Absolutely.
been in that situation, or someone younger than you that hasn't got to that point in their life, etc.
Yeah.
And when you talk about flexibility, I think obviously post-COVID, there's a general recognition that flexibility around where we work has become much more accepted, with more hybrid working and remote working. And
Yeah.
I would argue that the flexibility around when we work hasn't moved to the same extent, partly because we all, you know, because the business world runs 24/7 and it's
Yeah.
usually at high speed and urgent deadlines, etc.
Yeah.
And yet actually there's a lot more we could do, a lot more creatively and innovatively around flexing working time, both working hours but
Yeah.
also leave,
Yeah.
flexibility of leave, and
Mm.
presumably also around how we think about career progression, so it's not necessarily as linear as perhaps men might be used to. Can you say a bit
Totally.
more about some of those
Totally. Oh,
possibilities?
yeah, and that's totally where I'm talking loads at the moment. I love it, and I think that's one of the reasons I changed my initial book from being a ladder, career ladder, was to a mountain, because actually it is. And you may have heard of Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis and squiggly careers, and people do things in different ways now. But yes, I think I talk a lot about things like job sharing, because this was a real highlight for me that I came across when I was researching the book. And I hadn't even thought about this as a tool for gender equality until I wrote my book. And I heard Will McDonald, who used to work in a senior role at Aviva. I think at the time I spoke to him, he was the only known all male senior job share in the UK. And I thought, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if more men did, job sharing? That would allow the women, potentially their other halves, to be able to do more work. But equally, for women to job share together, it means they could work 3 days a week potentially and have 2 days that they don't have to work. And the more I've looked at this, and I've spoken to so many job share pairs now, the the productivity for the organization is massive. The benefit to the individuals is massive. They're people I've spoken to said, "Oh, I wouldn't go back part time because it's really hard to do a part time job because you end up back in the office on Monday, catching up on everything you've missed, and it's really hard to do that." So the people I know who've done part time and job sharing roles have said it's just been life changing for them, because they get to have those 2 clear days when they know that their work is being covered
Hmm.
by their job share pair. So I think things like that are really, really important. And often companies say to me, "Oh, well, it wouldn't work in our jobs," but I've heard it working for medical consultants, which is a life and death situation. So it really can work. And people might think it was another head count, but actually you get. I think there's some research that was done. This 1.2 times the cost, but it's 1.5 times the value. And this is something I want to do more work around in terms of looking at that productivity. And because you can't leave things at the end of the week without finishing it off. You can't think, "Oh, I'll just do it on Monday." So the productivity is immense, and I think this is something we should really look at for the future. Different ways of
Yeah,
working. Let's throw it up and let's throw the rule book out the window and yeah, think about things
yeah.
differently.
Yeah, because even when it comes to things like term time working,
Yeah,
which would massively help with young children in
yeah,
school, etc.,
mm,
it's something that's really not widespread or widely adopted. And I
mm,
think a lot of organisations do think, oh, well, that's just too complicated to get our head around. And as you
mm,
say, there's always a reason why it wouldn't work here.
yeah,
But I can imagine, and this is very anecdotal on my part,
mm,
but the few people that I know that have been in relatively senior job shares, again, women, they've, because they have a job share arrangement that works well, and they've been very careful around how they manage it, they have stayed in those roles in that organization for a long time. So
yeah,
even just looking at my small sample, I'm like, okay, when it works really well, that's a fabulous
yeah,
means of retaining people.
Yeah.
because they value that setup so well,
Yeah.
so much.
And
Yeah.
as you know, we've talked about confidence, and I think sometimes in senior roles, women can feel that they lack a bit of confidence in terms of pushing themselves and perhaps taking that next leap to a sort of promotion. And those job share pairs that I've spoken to said they have so much more confidence being as part of a team because they can jump together, and they have like their own mentor um, with them all the time. You know, they've got somebody there
Mm.
saying, yeah, we can do it, and, you know, actually negotiating pay rises, going together as a pair. And yeah, I mean, I could talk about job sharing forever, but
Yeah.
I think it's fabulous. I think it's
Yeah,
fabulous and
brilliant
something we
and
should do
great to
more of.
hear. You've got lots of examples and proof that it works, and also the business benefit
Mm,
of that as well. And talking about retention,
mm.
I'm interested to know what you look for. What are the factors that make you want to stay in the work you're doing? Or I know you've obviously run your own business, but you have worked in corporates as well before.
Mm.
And what do you know about from your research that you do? What are the things that do persuade people to stay once they're already in an organization?
Yeah, and I think yeah, my situation is slightly different because I'm my own boss, and I can and I think the key thing for me is flexibility and doing something I love doing.
Mm.
And actually, that is we're actually doing some research we launched last week for International Women's Day, looking at the retention equation and looking at what factors potentially mean that a woman will leave or stay within an organization. And we look at various factors like the sort of the presence of menopause or childcare or line managers or the culture of the organization or salary and benefits and those sorts of things. And we've literally just done a beta test with a small sample so far. So this is literally sort of hot off the press, but we're going out there now to do more. Um, but the biggest thing that's coming out is the not as much the sort of menopause and childcare and those sorts of things. It's more about the line manager and really enjoying the job and being really so actually having a line manager that is really understanding. And what we find is if the line manager is not great, that is the more likely that somebody's going to leave than not. So very early days, but yeah, watch out and look out for that, because I think it's and another work we've done with other companies as well has showed that the importance of line managers and having those
Mm.
training managers up, because often people become managers without any training, or they have the kind of basic training but actually don't get trained up in how to have courageous conversations, how to understand some of these challenges that people can face, not just women, you know, just being really empathetic and understanding, being vulnerable and open to saying you don't have the answers all the time. So I think, you know, this the massive thing around line management that we need to think
Yes.
about.
Yes. And that reminds me of a book I read recently, Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, who's the head of people operations at
Mm.
Google. And they are really systematic about line manager quality. And he goes into quite a lot of detail in the book about it. And they measure line manager effectiveness in lots of different ways, in a kind of
Mm.
360 ways. They get employee feedback about that as well. And they focus on the highest performing managers in terms of that relationship, positive relationship with the individual, and they focus on the lowest kind of 5%, and they find really creative ways to get the highest performing 5% to support the lowest performing, so they bring them up to a higher level. So anyone
Oh,
listening, if
brilliant.
they're interested in that, that might be a good read, and
Mm.
maybe something
I'll
to
look that up.
consider as part of your
Yeah.
alongside your research as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And just coming towards the end, how optimistic do you feel that we're going to see, continue to see good progress? And if you had, of all the different conversations you have with clients and the research you do, what would you pick as one really innovative or effective thing for an organization to trial or to focus on? I know that's asking you to pick a needle out of a haystack, but
Mm.
where would you recommend people focus their efforts?
So I think, I mean, I suppose I speak a lot to organisations who are forward thinking and want to change things. So I think in those instances, I think I'm very optimistic that they're thinking about the right sort of things to be doing. They're thinking about things like allyship, how to engage more men in the conversation, make sure the majority are starting to change things, because otherwise it's not going to happen. So I'm optimistic from that point of view. I think. I think allyship would be the biggest thing, really, about how to, as I said, how to engage men in this debate, because we know that the world is still very much a man's world, whether we like it or not. And I think we just need to, rather than telling men off, it's not man bashing here. It's about actually really understanding how it feels for them. Actually, what does the gender equality debate mean to them? They are the other half of gender balance. It's not about women's equality. It's about gender equality, and I think it's understanding each person. I think that the one thing, the sort of golden thread that runs through my book is personalization and thinking about every individual. So let's scrap kind of men, women. Let's think about every individual. And this, I think, a lot of companies are saying, "Oh, we're doing so many different groups, so many networks. We've got, ethnicity networks, we've got pride networks, we've got gender networks, and there's a lot of talk now about kind of trying to bring those together. And I think, in a way, it's actually right. You should be thinking about each individual human being and actually what we each need to thrive, and not put people in boxes. We're not all homogenous groups. Men often get lumped in a men bucket, in a macho bucket, and that's not true. There are so many men who, and I think we think about things like carers rather than men and women, and we start to change the perspective on this. So actually, in organisations, we start to change the message around what do we mean by carers or parents, and not about men and women, and try and, if we can start changing the workplaces, that hopefully will then have a ripple out to then be able to sort of educate our children and change things that way around. Because I think it's a massive thing. If we just need to kind of break it down and work out what we can do in our own teams, in our own organisations, in our own homes, and then hopefully those messages will spread more far and wide.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. And for people listening who
Mm.
want to find out more about the work you do or follow some of the research that you're doing,
Mm.
or interested in the book and your podcast, what's the best way for them to get connected and stay in touch?
Brilliant. Well, LinkedIn I use a lot, so do connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me on our website, which is encompassequality.com. That's probably the easiest way for you to find out more, and it'd be great to talk to you about the research as well if anybody's interested in taking part.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'll put links to that all in the show notes as well.
Thank
So
you.
easy to find you. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Joy. It's been such a pleasure talking about gender equality, digging into the barriers, but also to some of the progress that we're seeing. And thank you for sharing such practical advice around the things organisations can really focus on that help shift the dial on that. It's been
You're
wonderful
very
having you.
welcome.
Thanks for being a brilliant guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.